Hello and welcome to TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, April 8th, and as usual, we got a great show today. Today we'll be interviewing Select Board candidate Zoe Lynn, and I have no doubt she's going to be talking about the wicked problems that Brookline faces. But before we get to that, we are going to do the news as we are wont to do. Nationally, President Biden has accelerated the vaccination timeline so that all folks 18 and up will be eligible to get an appointment beginning April 17th. Special day for me. It's my dad's birthday. It's my Nana's birthday. It's the day everybody can get a vaccine. We're having fun. That doesn't mean you'll get one. It just means you are entitled to sign up for an appointment, right? Because adding to the number of people who can get a vaccine without having the vaccine doses and the infrastructure to administer those doses doesn't get us there. But on that note, nationally, we're hitting 3 million doses administered a day. That's fabulous news. And in Massachusetts, just a couple of days ago, we hit 100,000 doses administered in a single day. Now, the weekly number is really more relevant, and the weekly number is about 500,000 doses a week, which is great progress, and we're hoping to continue that progress and hoping that we are doing it equitably. It's not enough to just do the numbers. You got to get them in the right arms, and that means getting them in the arms of folks who are most at risk, not just because of age, but because of a variety of other factors. And so that work continues. Here in Massachusetts, at this point, anyone age 55 or older, or who has one comorbidity is eligible now. Technically, I think the state still says April 19th for everyone 18 and up, but I suspect that they will adjust that to comply with President Biden's directive of April 17th. The RMV is having computer trouble. I don't know quite the details. It has to do with a vendor. And the long and short of it is, if your inspection sticker expired in March, you still can't get another one. And so the expectation is you're going to get a whole nother month, and they're going to have to double up their work in late April and May to keep everybody on board. What can I tell you? I ride the bus. In Brookline, the Brookline Housing Authority and the Brookline Health Department have been working together to vaccinate residents of Brookline Housing Authority senior housing facilities on site. They've already done one round. They're getting ready to do a second round. So that's really great news and a great example of local government catching in some details that the state government isn't always able to focus on. Public schools, grades K through 5 are back. Grades 6 through 8 return April 12th, and high school students are back to 4 days a week starting today. They're going to keep Wednesdays off. Really, it's a quick news week, and get outside, enjoy the weather. I'm looking outside right now. It's beautiful. And without further ado, we're going to go right to our interview again here on Brookline Interactive Group. We're interviewing Zoe Lynn, Select Board candidate. See you on the flip. And as promised, today on Brookline Interactive Group, we've got Zoe Lynn, candidate for Select Board. Zoe, thanks for joining us today.
Tommy, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
Zoe, you're running for Select Board, but a lot of folks haven't had the chance to meet you. So tell us what you've been up to, since birth. What's been going on in your life?
Well, okay, that's a good question. Let's talk about my background on climate. I think that's will help frame since birth. So I think since a kid and a teenager, I cared a lot about environmental issues. In early 2000, we started seeing that we had a pretty serious climate problem. Before it was cool to be a climate activist, I cared a lot about this issue and wanted to know a couple things. How did people understand the science? How did people understand information? And how did you get them to change behaviors? And how did you get it to happen in the public sector, the space where we had a lot of opportunity to make change? And it wasn't all that like that when I was asking myself those questions once upon a time. It was like, why won't people recycle? Why won't they just bike to work? They live so close. I wanted to know those questions, and it grew into bigger questions. How do we deal with these really complex issues like climate change? How do we get governments to move? How do we get community to buy into these really important issues? And that took a lot of time to figure that out. And it wasn't an easy question to answer. And I went to grad school to help get more answers on those questions, and ended up working for the town of Brookline, helping them hit their climate mitigation targets. In 2019, we did quite a robust transformational effort on how we would move climate policy forward in town government. We piloted it, we tested it, we delivered Warrant Article 21, which was the fossil fuel prohibition ban, as part of that effort. And yeah, that takes us up to just before the pandemic.
And so now, as we're sort of hopefully getting out of the pandemic, you're looking to get into town politics on the elected side. So you're running for select board, which is it's a big lift. It's a lot of work. What on earth are you doing that for?
Good question. I loved my job working for the town, and I loved the work we were doing, and it was really important. But the position, the work that I was doing really needed to happen at the select board level. And a handful of people encouraged me to run. I thought about it, did my legwork to see if I could have an impact and if it was something I could really make a difference on, and decided to do it. I think in addition to climate action, we have some pretty big issues facing the town. Let me list them real quick, and then we can maybe dig into those a little bit. One, climate. Two, affordable housing and economic development. They're very much related in how we plan for and use our land and develop, continue to grow and maintain our infrastructure. Three, racial justice, racial equity. This has been front and center since George Floyd's death in 2020, and since the world marched, saying that they were sick of seeing such awful things happen to Black men and Black boys. That's issue number 3 facing us. We're part of that very challenging issue that we need to resolve. 4, we have a structural deficit, and for those that don't know what that means, it means our projected revenues are lower than our projected expenses. So we don't have money. Every time we project out our finances, we have a deficit, and that's a problem. We need to address this, and it's related to how we address the other issues. If you don't have money, you can't move things forward with good staffing, and yeah. And then number 5, inclusion and care for our seniors, for people with disabilities, for our public servants, just creating a place where Brookline is inclusive of everyone. And I mean everyone, how we make decisions and how we think about each other and how we treat each other. I think I'm putting under a big umbrella of inclusion. So those are 5 really big challenging issues. And my background in managing these complex issues like climate change is why I decided to run. I think I would add a lot of value to help us get through these, start making progress on these.
So let's dig into them, and I'll take them in the order you presented them. I was smart enough to write them down. And that means we're going to start with climate. And the context that I want to frame this conversation in is what the town of Brookline can do, specifically what the town government can do with regards to climate. Look, the town government cannot, interfere with international trade agreements, and the town government cannot require you to change what car you drive, right? There's real limits on what the town can do. So within that context, tell us, from the perspective of climate, what you imagine the select board doing in the next 3 years and beyond to influence this conversation.
Yeah, okay, Good question, Tommy. So one, we have our own emissions. So we're not a zero emitting communities, and so that we can get those done, and that's a big challenge in and of itself. Two, municipalities have been very effective at leading the way across the country on climate-related issues, and helping other players lead. And so I think that's an opportunity for us to really demonstrate different things that work for the public sector, but for the private sector and for the nonprofit sector. Although there's sometimes mechanisms that make them a little different for implementation, it's people look to others to see how they're tackling a challenge. And then three, we actually have influence. Warrant Article 21, the fossil fuel prohibition ban, it shaped how the state and many other players, other municipalities, started looking at their emissions and their local bylaws. So that's a big, so influence, our own emissions and modeling, creating pilots and programs. That's a lot to do, and that's enough for us to get started.
It certainly is. It certainly is a lot, and there's no question that Warrant Article 21 influenced state law in a meaningful and important way. And I just want to parse it a little bit more finely. There's two kinds of emissions in the town of Brookline. You can divide it in this way. There's the emissions that the capital T town of Brookline emits, right? The town government owned vehicles and the town government owned buildings and the town government owned electricity. And then there's everything else, and everything else is much bigger than the capital T town. So you mentioned Warrant Article 21, which focused on reducing fossil fuel use in new construction and buildings, in new buildings. What else do you have in mind, though? Where else can Brookline expand into the private sector, the nonprofit sector, the sector that isn't town government?
Yeah, so there's a couple things there. One, I think we've seen a lot of success with partnerships. So we're government partners with the private sector. We're government partners with nonprofits. So there's opportunity there for us to work together to deliver meaningful change. This is space where we're pioneering new ground. But what if the government created a program where we were able to work with a district that wanted solar on their buildings, private buildings? Yes, this is new space. We would have to work through the legalities and the contracts, but that's how we're going to troubleshoot some of these issues, is with different types of partnerships. So that's one. I think two, what I just want, greenhouse gas emissions, there's a lot of people that know you, Tommy, and are going to be watching and know a lot about greenhouse gas emissions. But for those that don't pay really close attention to the major areas where they come from, I have 4 buckets in my head. Every time I'm thinking greenhouse gas emissions, I always remember these 4 buckets: your buildings and their energy, transportation and their energy, our biosphere, which is like our green spaces, our tree cover, our soil, carbon content in the soil. This is space where we store or emit carbon, depending on what biosphere we're talking about. And then the way we procure and dispose of goods is a 4th bucket. And depending on how you classify them, people have different percentages for each of these, but these are the 4 spaces where municipalities can shape our emissions. And that's what we started working on in 2019, and we need to continue that work.
So speaking of space, let's move on to the second challenge: housing and economic development. Certainly, we are not an island. We're surrounded actually on all 4 sides by Boston, but also to the west by Newton. And our surrounding region has, and in fact, our nation has influence on housing and economic development. But what should the town be doing to ensure health and well-being with respect to housing and economic development?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. We're going to, if we have time, we'll talk about the structural deficit, and that's very much tied to economic development. It's about our tax revenue. So it's important. It's relevant for how the town raises money and offers services. Affordable housing. So I'm just getting some facts out of the way. Affordable housing. We're part of a regional housing crisis right now. It's not. Yes, we're not an island. We are not the only one dealing with some of the highest cost of living in the U.S. But we have to be part of the solutions on this. We need to partner with other folks to address this very complex issue where we're short housing. People are driving significant distances to get to their housing. We don't always have diversity of housing choices. This is something that the town of Brookline has a lot of opportunity to help shape that direction with their land use policies, their zoning policies, the way they work and engage the community, where we have spaces to develop in our commercial districts and along our transit corridors. So this is very much what government does, is help shape how our land is used, and a space where we have to be a proactive player to really address this. We can't sit by and watch this one and let it kind of come at us from all directions anymore. But yeah, pinning economic development, we'll come back to it, but I think they're very much connected, very much tightly connected. When you're dealing with development, you need to be looking at your housing and your economic development, partially because there's a lot of evidence that mixed use is very viable for climate change mitigation efforts, but also a very high quality of living. So we want to look at that, and we want to pull all this together and do very thoughtful, integrated planning, neighborhood-based solutions, but integrated planning.
Let's pivot. Let's talk about racial justice and equity. You mentioned George Floyd's murder as a spark that lit into the conscience of so many in our country and beyond. And certainly it is a national issue, but it's also a local issue. And sometimes those things overlap and sometimes they don't. Brookline has struggled here. Town government has struggled. The population has struggled with some of those decisions. The racial diversity of Brookline doesn't look like the racial diversity of Massachusetts. We have statistically a very high percentage of AAPI, and relative to the state, a low percentage of Latinx and African Americans. And we're struggling with this. And so where do you see the select board's role with you on the board with respect to, frankly, both Black and Asian race issues as we are discussing them today?
Yeah, okay, so a couple things. One, I mentioned George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor and many, many other people have brought race to the forefront, and it should have always been there. But we saw a huge shift in 2020 in public opinion and public awareness, and this is good. It was an awful, awful year, but we saw a shift, and the American public handed policymakers clear direction that it needed to change. And this change is hard. This is this wicked. So we haven't I haven't in this conversation used the word wicked challenge, and we might not have time to get to it, but Google it, wicked problems, wicked challenge. It's the area of where you're dealing with really complex issues like climate change. Racism is one of them. Very emotional, very hard, very institutionalized, very systemic. And to make changes like climate change, you have to go after systems. You have to hit it, not at individual behaviors, although that is one part of the solution, but it's not the only part. You have to attack it from a systems perspective. And Brookline governments are systems. They are what create our culture, create our institutions, and they have opportunity to help change those systems. We're not talking easy changes. We're talking things that have a lot of history and are very hard and painful for a lot of people, but are very emotional for a lot of people. But this is an opportunity because the public has said, we're not going to stand in your way if you get this done for us. They gave us marching orders, and that policy window is amazing. Very rarely does the public give you such clear marching orders. So that's part 1A, 1B of my response. I just want to add that I think on the select board, I think our first thing we need to do, and I'm open to other people's ideas, but is we need to have a summit, a racial justice, equity and inclusion summit where we really open up all the opportunities that we have to start tackling this. We have all the stakeholders there. We have the select board there. We have town staff there. And we do what we did on the climate work. We start brainstorming as a team across the community, and we identify the top areas where we're gonna start, not where we're gonna finish, but just where we're gonna get started this year. And we start working towards those as a team. I think we would see significant progress. It would be an education for everybody. It would be an engagement effort for everybody. It would be an opportunity for us to dig into really tough issues and find innovative solutions for very institutionalized problems. So I think that's one avenue for it. I think there's a lot of other avenues, but I think that would be the kickoff that we could, in June, start with that. And it could be part of other integrated planning on the other 5 issues too.
Certainly plenty to do. And again, it's such a complicated space with so many different interactions and relationships that, we're not going to get there in one day, and we're not going to get it all right all the time, but we got to do better. You mentioned the structural deficit earlier, and you put a pin in structural deficit as it relates to economic development. I want to come back to it. You're right. We do. The town of Brookline does have a structural deficit. At least it did pre-COVID, and now nobody has any idea what the future of economics looks like. Fortunately, folks are doing better in terms of tax revenue than people expected because of the expanded unemployment benefits, the direct payments to merchants, to small businesses, and so forth. The town, though, the town raises most of its revenue from property tax, and that is relatively stable. The challenge is that our costs are growing faster than we're allowed to raise our taxes. And so when we think about a structural deficit, how do we get our hands around that? There's 2 choices: some combination of reduced costs or increased revenue. Pick your poison. What's your plan?
Yeah, so 3 major, we need, revenue, rapid fire. 1 can come from fee-based services. It's not going to fill a gap for a structural deficit, changing program fees a little bit. That can fix small budget problems, but not big ones like this. Like you say, the tax base from commercial or residential property taxes. That's option 2 for revenue. Option 3 is our local receipts. And the last 2 are viable paired solutions that we can start digging into to bring in additional revenue. But we need to be proactive, and we need to start digging in. And there'll be a theme throughout this call, digging in. We need to be proactive. We need to have strategy to deal with these issues. We can't sit back and watch them. They won't solve themselves, and they're complicated issues, and they're related to all the other issues. The other thing that we can talk about is debt overrides, but we have to talk about them. Otherwise, they're going to hit us as a surprise every single time when we're trying to fill a gap. I wanted to say one other thing on that, and I lost it. Sorry. And it might come back to me, maybe, or maybe not. COVID brain.
CPA?
Ooh, we need to pass it. Thank you. Yep. Vote yes. Question 2.
Of course, the CPA is the Community Preservation Act, a program in which the town is able to raise its property tax a little bit, but receive state match. And that money is spent on historic preservation, parks and open space, and subsidized housing. And there are rules about how much in each, but it's very customizable. So we talked about the structural deficit, but you suggested that it relates to economic development, and I want to go ahead and let you make that connection a little bit more clearly. Economic development in town, and how you as a select board member will or won't stimulate additional commercial activity.
Yeah, so those 3 points that I mentioned, that where we can get revenue, fees, tax base, or receipts, commercial development hits 2 of those. So 1, it hits your commercial tax base, and if you're adding more to your commercial tax base, that's 1 space. 2, it hits your receipts. If you're doing good commercial and economic development, your receipts are going to be strong. And so, but that in coordination with housing development and not just housing development, how we want our neighborhoods to feel and look. And again, not every neighborhood in Brookline, but where do we have opportunity to tackle this first? We don't take it on all at the same time. Let's look at Route 9 corridor. There's a lot of people in agreement that there's a lot of opportunity there. So let's start there, and let's start figuring out how we're going to develop it. actually, there's 2 committees already looking at that, but we could continue from that space. And I think there's other commercial sectors, commercial zones and transit zones that we could investigate. That could be a starting point. But I would handle this similar to how I handled climate and how I would handle race. I think we start by getting input from a lot of people, and we have a summit. We can call one a summit. We can call one a big meeting. If we want to name them different, whatever we want to do, that's all open for recommendations. But we start by really doing strong engagement and getting ideas out there. And for those that attended the summit, we had something like 100, maybe 150 different ideas that people submitted. We posted them up at the time as the Coolidge Corner School. We posted them up on the wall, and we let people add notes, and it really got us off to a really good start. So we can do that on all these issues, and that's how we should do it on these issues.
So that summit included lots of folks, and that brings us to item number 5, inclusion. What are some concrete things that the select board can do in the next few years to include more residents of our community, more members of our community, I should say, who aren't always being included today?
Yeah, so for folks that have listened through the whole interview, they're going to see themes that I talk about. One, let's do engagement up front on the beginning of these issues. That's a first space where you start including more people. You actually go out and include them. You ask them to show up, and you want their opinions. And if they can't show up, you go to them, and you create little different sessions where you go across the community and convene meetings. Brookliners do this in all sorts of capacities, and we certainly could do that on these big 5 issues. Our seniors, people with disabilities, we reach out to them and make sure we have included their perspectives. But those are 2 demographics. There's other demographics where we reach out and make sure those voices are heard. And it can be through that reaching out can be through different avenues, depending on what the project is and what we're trying to accomplish. The engagement it doesn't have to be cookie cutter every time. But when we get those voices in at the beginning of the conversation, and we get their ideas, and we check in along the way, we have seen again and again that is good policy. It's policy that the public supports. It's sustainable. It's usually fiscally responsible. And the more voices we have in the development up front, and the more times you check in with different stakeholders along the way, the more likely that policy is going to pass. It'll pass well, and it'll be actually transformational, and it's what it accomplishes. So I think that's a quick answer to how we start including more people.
Zoe, we've just got a few minutes left. I want to thank you for coming on Brookline Interactive Group today. And I want to remind our voters that this coming election is on Star Wars Day, May 4th. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can vote early in person at the town clerk's office at 333 Washington Street. You can vote early by mail. Use your favorite search engine and search Brookline Town Clerk election, and you'll get all of that information. But we've got about 1 minute left. And so Zoe, now's your chance, sort of final thoughts. You got a website. Tell us how to think about this next election.
I would say this is a super important election, because we have 5 really big challenges we need to really start working at. I hope people go to my website. It's votezoeforbrookline.com. I hope they reach out to me. I hope they show up at some of our visioning sessions and other spaces where we start digging into these issues now. They're all on the website, votezoeforbrookline.com. I'm listening. I'm campaigning, but I'm also listening, and we'll hit the ground running. And everybody that interacts with me now, I'm capturing their thoughts, and that's going to help paint the picture on how we move forward. So these are important conversations, and I hope people participate.
Ladies and gentlemen, Zoe Lynn, again, thanks for being on the show, and we will see you next week. Be well, everyone.